My name is Abigail, and I'm 28 years old. 3 months ago, I watched my mother give away everything my father had worked his entire life for. I stood there in our family living room, surrounded by relatives I barely recognized. They were circling like vultures around Dad's possessions. My mother was handing out his tools, his books, even his favorite chair. The chair where he used to read me bedtime stories when I was little. I thought that was the worst betrayal I'd ever witness. I was wrong. The real shock came 2 weeks later when Dad's lawyer called. He had news that would change everything I thought I knew about my family, about loyalty, about the power of one man's final wish to expose the truth about the people we trust most. If you've ever felt like an outsider in your own family, this story will hit you right in the heart. Because sometimes the people who are supposed to love us unconditionally are the ones who hurt us the deepest. Dad had been sick for 8 months before he passed. Cancer took him piece by piece, but he fought until the very end. I was the only one who stayed by his side through every chemo session, every sleepless night in the hospital, every moment when he was too weak to speak but squeezed my hand to let me know he heard me. Mom said she couldn't handle seeing him like that. My older brother Marcus claimed work was too demanding. My sister Rachel lived 3 states away and said traveling was too expensive. But I knew the real reason they stayed away. They couldn't face the reality that Dad was dying. The funeral was beautiful. Dad would have loved seeing so many people there. But within hours of laying him to rest, the circus began. Mom announced she was cleaning out the house. She said keeping Dad's things was too painful. She needed a fresh start. I offered to help sort through everything. We could donate some items and keep the meaningful ones. But Mom had already decided. She was giving everything to family members who had barely visited Dad in his final months. Uncle Jerry got Dad's entire workshop, the man who hadn't spoken to Dad in 2 years over some petty argument. Cousin Linda received Mom's china set, the one Dad had saved for months to buy as a wedding gift. Aunt Susan walked away with Dad's coin collection that he'd spent decades building. I watched it all happen like a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. When I asked Mom if I could have Dad's reading glasses, she looked at me like I was being selfish. She said I was too young to understand the burden of keeping so many memories around. That night, I went home to my small apartment feeling completely alone. I'd lost my father and somehow lost my place in the family too. I kept thinking about all the conversations Dad and I had shared, about his dreams for the family business he'd built from nothing, about the values he'd tried to teach us. Dad always said family should stick together. He believed in loyalty above everything else. But where was that loyalty now? If you are watching this right now, drop a comment letting me know where you are viewing from. Before I tell you about this life-changing decision, hit like and subscribe to hear more real stories about family loyalty and betrayal that might just change how you see your own relationships. 2 weeks after the funeral, I was back at work trying to pretend everything was normal. I teach 3rd grade at the local elementary school. Being around children helped distract me from the grief. Kids have a way of seeing straight through to what matters most. That Tuesday afternoon, I was grading papers when my phone rang. The caller ID showed Hoffman and Associates, Dad's law firm. My heart started racing because I couldn't imagine why they'd be calling me. Mr. Hoffman's voice was gentle but serious. He said he needed to see me as soon as possible. There was something about Dad's estate that required immediate attention. Something that involved my grandfather's will from 15 years ago. I'd never heard anything about Grandpa having a separate will. As far as I knew, everything had been settled when he passed. But Mr. Hoffman insisted this was urgent. He asked me to come to his office the next morning and to bring my mother and siblings. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept wondering what Grandpa could have possibly arranged that was still affecting our family after all these years. Grandpa had been Dad's hero, an immigrant who built a small construction company into a successful business. He'd taught Dad everything about hard work and integrity. Whatever Mr. Hoffman had discovered, I had a feeling it was going to change everything. I just had no idea how much. To understand what happened next, you need to know about my family. We weren't always this broken. There was a time when the Hendersons were actually close, when Sunday dinners meant something, when we looked out for each other. Dad was the middle child of 3 boys. He was the one who stayed close to home and took care of Grandpa when Grandma died, while his brothers moved across the country chasing bigger opportunities. Dad remained loyal to the family business. Grandpa had started Henderson Construction with nothing but a pickup truck and determination. By the time I was born, it was the most respected construction company in our county. Dad poured his heart into that business. He treated every employee like family and every project like it was his own home he was building. Mom married Dad right out of college. Sarah Henderson was beautiful, charming, and knew how to work a room. She came from a wealthy family who never quite approved of Dad's blue-collar background. But Dad adored her. He would have given her anything she asked for. My brother Marcus is 32, and everything Dad wasn't. He's flashy, impatient, and always looking for shortcuts to success. Marcus went to business school and came back with big ideas about expanding the company. He wanted to take on huge commercial projects and grow fast. Dad preferred the steady, personal approach that had built their reputation. Marcus married a woman named Jennifer, who fit perfectly into his ambitious lifestyle. She drove luxury cars and wore designer clothes. Jennifer made it clear she thought Dad's traditional methods were holding the family back financially. My sister Rachel is 30 and lives in California. She's an artist who never wanted anything to do with construction or small-town life. Rachel is talented and independent, but she's also incredibly self-centered. She calls home maybe twice a year and visits even less often. Rachel married a tech entrepreneur named David. They live in a $1 million house and travel the world. But Rachel always seemed bitter that Dad hadn't supported her art career more financially when she was starting out. Then there's me, the baby of the family who became Dad's shadow. I was the one who spent summers working at construction sites. I learned to read blueprints and use power tools before I could properly apply makeup. Dad and I would talk for hours about everything from business philosophy to life dreams. I chose teaching because I wanted to make a difference in kids' lives. Dad was so proud when I graduated college. He said I had the biggest heart in the family and would touch more lives than any building could ever shelter. But my career choice meant I'd never be wealthy like Marcus or glamorous like Rachel. I drove a 10-year-old Honda and lived in a modest apartment. Sometimes I felt like the poor relation at family gatherings. The tension in our family had been building for years. Marcus constantly pressured Dad to expand the business or sell it to a bigger company. He said Dad was wasting the potential for real wealth. Jennifer would make snide comments about Dad being too sentimental and old-fashioned. Rachel rarely visited, but when she did, she'd complain about feeling unsupported. She'd bring up how Dad had helped pay for Marcus's business degree but couldn't do the same when she needed money for art supplies. Mom tried to keep peace between everyone, but I could see the stress wearing on her. She started siding with Marcus. More often, especially when Jennifer would talk about what other families their age had accumulated in wealth. Dad felt caught in the middle. He loved his children but couldn't understand why the business that had provided for everyone wasn't enough. Why success had to mean something bigger or different than what he'd built with his own hands. The last few years, family dinners became tense affairs. Marcus would arrive in his expensive car, dressed in suits that cost more than I made in a month. Rachel would video call from whatever exotic location she was visiting. I'd sit there watching Dad try to connect with children who seemed to have outgrown him. When Dad got sick, these dynamics became even more strained. Marcus was frustrated that Dad wouldn't make concrete plans for the business succession. Rachel felt guilty for being so far away, but not guilty enough to come home more often. Mom was overwhelmed and started leaning heavily on Marcus for major decisions. I was the one who drove Dad to appointments. I was there when he had bad days and couldn't get out of bed. I held his hand when the pain medication made him confused and scared. Have you ever been the one who shows up when it's hardest? When there's nothing glamorous about love, just the daily choice to be present? That was my role in our family. The reliable one who never asked for much in return. The morning I was supposed to meet Mr. Hoffman, I arrived at his office 15 minutes early. I'd barely slept and my stomach was churning with nervous energy. The law office smelled like old leather and coffee. Mr. Hoffman had been Dad's lawyer for over 20 years, and his lined face showed genuine concern. Marcus arrived exactly on time, dressed in his usual expensive suit. Jennifer was with him, carrying a designer purse that probably cost more than my monthly rent. They both looked annoyed to be there, like this was an inconvenience interrupting more important business. Mom came in looking frazzled. She'd been spending her days sorting through decades of accumulated household items. She kept saying she needed to downsize and simplify her life. But I suspected she was trying to erase reminders of Dad rather than deal with her grief. Rachel had flown in from California the night before. She looked tan and relaxed, like she'd just come from vacation. She hugged everyone briefly and immediately started checking her phone for messages. Mr. Hoffman waited until we were all seated before opening a thick manila folder. His expression was serious as he put on his reading glasses. He cleared his throat and looked directly at each of us. Before I explain why you're here, I need to tell you about a conversation I had with your father 6 months ago, he began. Robert came to see me with concerns about how his father's final wishes were being honored. My heart started beating faster. Grandpa had died 15 years ago. What could possibly be unresolved after all this time? Mr. Hoffman continued. Your grandfather, William Henderson, created a specific provision in his will. A provision that your father was instructed to keep confidential until certain conditions were met. Those conditions have now been triggered by Robert's death. Marcus leaned forward in his chair. What kind of provision? Dad never mentioned anything about Grandpa's will having ongoing requirements. That's because Robert was specifically asked to keep this information private, Mr. Hoffman replied. Your grandfather was a very wise man who understood family dynamics better than most people realize. He pulled out a document that looked official and important. William Henderson established what's called a character legacy trust. He left a substantial sum of money to be distributed among his grandchildren, but only under very specific circumstances. Rachel looked up from her phone with sudden interest. How substantial? $250,000, Mr. Hoffman said quietly. The room went completely silent. Jennifer's mouth actually fell open. Marcus sat back in his chair like he'd been struck. Mom's hands started shaking slightly. $250,000? I whispered. Grandpa had that much money separate from everything else? Mr. Hoffman nodded. Your grandfather was very conservative with his investments. He saved this money specifically for his grandchildren, but he attached very particular conditions to receiving it. He opened the document and began reading. The money will be distributed equally among my grandchildren, but only to those who demonstrate true loyalty and character when their father needs them most. Marcus interrupted. What does that mean exactly? Loyalty and character are pretty subjective terms. Your grandfather defined those terms very specifically, Mr. Hoffman continued. The money goes only to grandchildren who physically care for their father during his final illness, who sacrifice their own comfort to ensure he's never alone. who put family duty above personal convenience. My stomach dropped. I suddenly understood why Mr. Hoffman had called this meeting. Jennifer looked confused. But how would anyone know? Who met those requirements? William died 15 years ago. Your father was instructed to keep detailed records, Mr. Hoffman explained. Every doctor's appointment, every hospital stay, every difficult night when Robert needed care. Your father documented who was present and who was absent. He pulled out another folder, this one thick with papers. Robert kept meticulous notes because he knew this day would eventually come. He recorded every interaction, every offer of help, every excuse for not being available. Rachel's face had gone pale. Marcus was staring at the documents like they might burst into flames. Mom spoke for the first time. So you're saying Dad was judging us this whole time? Keeping score of who was the best child? Not judging, Mr. Hoffman corrected gently. Your grandfather simply wanted to ensure his money went to family members who understood the true meaning of loyalty. People who show up when it's difficult, not just when it's convenient. If you've ever felt like your efforts went unnoticed, you'll understand how this moment felt for me. All those long nights in the hospital, all those times I canceled my own plans to drive Dad to appointments. Suddenly, it all meant something different. But I also felt sick thinking about what this revelation would do to our already fractured family relationships. Mr. Hoffman opened Dad's detailed records and began reading aloud. His voice was steady and professional, but each entry felt like a small explosion in the quiet room. March 15th, chemotherapy appointment. Abigail present, stayed entire day. Marcus called to cancel. Work emergency. Rachel sent flowers. March 22nd, emergency room visit, 2 a.m. Abigail drove Robert, stayed until 6 a.m. Called Marcus, phone went to voicemail. Called Rachel, no answer. April 3rd, surgery consultation. Abigail took day off work to attend. Sarah too upset to come. Marcus said he'd try to make it, but didn't show. The list went on and on. Appointment after appointment. Crisis after crisis. My name appeared in almost every single entry. Sometimes Mom was there, but often she'd found excuses to avoid the harder moments. Marcus appeared sporadically, usually with business-related explanations for his absences. Rachel's name showed up mainly in phone calls and flower deliveries. Marcus's face was getting redder with each entry. This is ridiculous, he finally exploded. I was running the family business. Someone had to keep things operating while Dad was sick. I was securing our financial future. Jennifer jumped in to support him. Marcus was working 18-hour days trying to keep everything together. He was sacrificing just as much as anyone else, just in a different way. Rachel's voice was shaky when she spoke. I live 3,000 miles away. I called Dad every week. I sent cards and gifts. I couldn't just abandon my life and career to move back home. But you could abandon Dad when he needed you most, I said quietly. The words came out before I could stop them. The room erupted. Marcus stood up and pointed at me. Don't you dare take some moral high ground here, Abigail. You're single with no real responsibilities. It was easy for you to play the devoted daughter because you had nothing else going on. Nothing else going on? I stood up too, my voice shaking with anger. I have a career. I have students who depend on me. I gave up dating, weekends, vacations, everything to be there for Dad. Jennifer sneered. Please. You're an elementary school teacher. It's not like you had some high-powered career to sacrifice. That comment hit me like a physical blow. At least I chose a career that helps people instead of just making money. Rachel tried to play peacemaker. Can we please not attack each other's life choices? This whole situation is insane. Grandpa died 15 years ago. How is this even legally binding? Mr. Hoffman had been watching our family implode with sad professionalism. The trust is completely legal and enforceable. Your grandfather worked with several lawyers to ensure there would be no loopholes or challenges. Mom finally spoke up, her voice bitter. So Robert was spying on us this whole time? Recording our every move like some kind of test? He was honoring his father's wishes, Mr. Hoffman replied firmly. William Henderson was concerned about what would happen to family loyalty after he was gone. He'd seen too many families torn apart by money and convenience. Marcus was pacing now. This is emotional manipulation. Grandpa is controlling us from the grave. No, I said, finding my voice again. Grandpa was rewarding the kind of person Dad raised me to be. Someone who shows up when it matters. Someone who doesn't abandon family when things get difficult. Rachel wiped tears from her eyes. So what happens now? Abigail gets all the money because she's geographically convenient? Mr. Hoffman consulted his notes one final time. According to the records and the terms of the trust, Abigail is the only grandchild who consistently met the requirements for loyalty and character during Robert's illness. The silence that followed was deafening. $250,000. More money than I'd ever imagined having. But somehow it felt hollow knowing it came at the cost of exposing how broken my family really was. Marcus grabbed Jennifer's hand. This is ridiculous. We're going to contest this. There has to be some legal way to challenge a will based on such subjective criteria. You can certainly try, Mr. Hoffman said calmly. But your grandfather anticipated that possibility. He included very specific documentation requirements and had multiple witnesses to his intentions. Mom looked at me with an expression I couldn't read. Disappointment? Resentment? Grief? I suppose you think you deserve this money more than your own mother? That question felt like the ultimate test. Did I think I deserved it more than the woman who gave birth to me? More than my siblings who had their own lives and challenges? The truth was complicated. I didn't feel like I deserved it because I was better than them. I felt like I'd earned it because I'd made different choices about what mattered most. Have you ever been in a moment where your whole family's true feelings about you became crystal clear? That's exactly where I was sitting. I left Mr. Hoffman's office that day feeling completely numb. The inheritance was legally mine, but accepting it felt like accepting that my family was truly broken. Marcus and Jennifer stormed out without saying goodbye. Rachel hugged me briefly, but I could feel her resentment in the tightness of her embrace. Mom was the most devastating. She looked at me like I'd somehow orchestrated this whole situation, like I'd manipulated Dad and Grandpa to favor me over everyone else. I hope you're happy, she said as we stood in the parking lot. You always were his favorite, and now you have proof. Those words cut deeper than anything Marcus or Rachel had said. I'd never thought of myself as Dad's favorite. I thought I was just the daughter who showed up. But maybe that's what made the difference. The next few weeks were brutal. Marcus hired a lawyer to challenge the will, but Mr. Hoffman had been right. Grandpa's trust was airtight. Rachel flew back to California and didn't call for 2 months. Mom started avoiding my phone calls and made excuses when I tried to visit. I felt like I'd lost my father and gained a fortune, but somehow lost my entire family in the process. The money sat in my bank account untouched while I wrestled with what to do next. 3 months after that terrible meeting, I made a decision that changed everything. I used $50,000 of the inheritance to establish a scholarship fund at the local community college, specifically for students from working-class families who wanted to pursue education or skilled trades. I named it the William and Robert Henderson Character Scholarship. I used another $50,000 to pay off my student loans and buy a small house. Nothing fancy, but a real home where I could build the life Dad had always encouraged me to create. The remaining $150,000 went into savings and investments. I wasn't sure what I'd do with it yet, but I knew I wanted to use it in ways that would honor both Dad's and Grandpa's values. When Mom heard about the scholarship, she called me for the first time in months. Her voice was softer than it had been since the funeral. "Your father would be proud of what you did with that money," she said quietly. "I've been angry at the wrong person. I was angry at you instead of angry at myself for not being stronger when he needed me." That conversation opened a door between us that had been slammed shut. Mom admitted she'd been overwhelmed by Dad's illness and had let Marcus take charge of too many decisions. She'd given away Dad's possessions because keeping them felt like admitting she'd failed him as a wife. Slowly, carefully, Mom and I began rebuilding our relationship. It wasn't the same as before, but it was honest in ways it had never been. Marcus eventually dropped the legal challenge. His lawyer had made it clear they had no realistic chance of success. But he also wasn't ready to repair our relationship. The money had exposed resentments that went much deeper than inheritance disputes. Rachel surprised me 6 months later by calling on Dad's birthday. She'd been thinking about our conversation in the lawyer's office and realized she'd been running from grief rather than dealing with it. She couldn't change the past, but she wanted to try being a better sister moving forward. 1 year later, I was sitting in my small backyard garden thinking about everything that had changed. I'd started dating someone wonderful, a fellow teacher who understood the importance of showing up for the people you love. My relationship with Mom had grown stronger through honest conversations about grief and regret. The scholarship fund had helped 8 students in its first year. I'd gotten thank you letters from kids who reminded me of Dad, hardworking, loyal, determined to build something meaningful with their lives. I still miss Dad every single day. But I'd learned something important about inheritance. The money Grandpa left was just paper and numbers. The real inheritance was the character Dad had helped me develop through years of showing me what loyalty and love actually looked like. If you're dealing with family conflict over money or inheritance, I want you to know that the relationships matter more than the dollars. But sometimes money reveals truths about people that needed to be exposed. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is set boundaries with people who don't value what you bring to their lives. As I'm recording this video 2 years later, I want to share what I've learned about family, loyalty, and the courage to stand alone when necessary. The inheritance didn't just change my financial situation, it changed how I see myself and what I'm willing to accept from the people who claim to love me. Marcus and I have had exactly 3 conversations since that day in the lawyer's office. Brief, polite exchanges at Mom's birthday dinner and Christmas. Jennifer still makes subtle digs about my windfall, as she calls it. But their opinion doesn't carry the weight it used to. I've learned that some people will only respect you when you stop desperately seeking their approval. Marcus always saw me as the little sister who'd never amount to much. The inheritance forced him to recognize that maybe he'd misjudged what success actually looks like. Rachel and I have slowly rebuilt a friendship. She visits once or twice a year now, and we have real conversations instead of surface-level catch-ups. She's admitted that she'd been jealous of my relationship with Dad for years. She thought he loved me more because I was more like him. The truth is, Dad loved all of us equally, but love isn't just a feeling. It's actions, presence, sacrifice. Dad poured love into all of us, but I was the only one who learned to pour it back in the same way. Mom and I are closer now than we've ever been. She's helping me plan the 2nd annual scholarship dinner, and she started volunteering at the Community Center. Grief almost broke her, but working through it honestly has made her stronger. The scholarship fund has now helped 23 students pursue education and skilled trades. Last month, I got a letter from Maria, a single mother who used the scholarship to become a certified electrician. She wrote that the program changed her family's entire trajectory. That's when I understood what Grandpa had really been trying to do. He wasn't trying to reward me for being Dad's caretaker. He was ensuring that his values would continue impacting people long after he was gone. If you're watching this and dealing with complicated family dynamics, I want you to know that you're not alone. Sometimes the people who are supposed to support us the most are the ones who hurt us the deepest. But here's what I've learned. You can't control how other people treat you, but you can control how you respond. You can choose to keep showing up with integrity even when others don't. You can choose to build the kind of character that honors the people who believed in you. Leave a comment below and tell me about a time when you had to choose between family harmony and doing what you knew was right. I read every single comment, and your stories help other viewers feel less alone in their struggles. The most surprising thing about receiving that inheritance wasn't the money itself. It was discovering that I'm stronger than I ever knew. For years, I'd felt like the least successful person in my family, the one without the fancy career or impressive lifestyle. But success isn't measured in salary or status symbols. It's measured in showing up when it's hard, in choosing love over convenience, in building something meaningful that outlasts your own life. Dad used to say that character is what you do when nobody's watching. But Grandpa understood something even deeper. Character is what you do when everyone is watching and judging, but you do the right thing anyway. If this story resonated with you, please hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. I share real stories about family, relationships, and finding the courage to live authentically even when it's difficult. Have you ever discovered something about your family that completely changed how you saw your relationships? Drop a comment and let me know. Building this community of people who understand complicated family dynamics has been one of the most healing parts of my journey. Before you go, I want to ask you something. What kind of legacy do you want to leave? Not just money or possessions, but character legacy. The values and love you pass down to the people who matter most. Dad's legacy wasn't the construction business or the house or any material thing. His legacy was teaching me that love is a verb, that loyalty means showing up, that family isn't just about blood relations, it's about who chooses to stand with you when life gets difficult. Thank you for letting me share this deeply personal story with you. Your support and comments mean everything to me. Until next time, remember that you are stronger and more valuable than you know.